James here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting July the 6th, 2020. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this week's video reading. I am so happy to have you here. This week I'm honoring the request of one of my viewers who asked me if I would be willing to work with the Gypsy Witch fortune-telling playing cards. So that is the system I'm going to be working with. Specifically, I am working with the vintage Gypsy Witch fortune-telling oracle cards. They are by Lynn Boyle. It is my favorite set of Gypsy Witch cards, and I will be leaving a link in the description box below so you can learn more about the deck, and if you fancy it based on what you see in this week's reading, how you can acquire it and add it to your own personal collection. So once again, I'm working with the vintage Gypsy Witch fortune-telling oracle cards by Lynn Boyle, and now that I've set things up, let's get to the table to see what the Gypsy Witch cards want to share with us about the week ahead. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I'm going to take a moment to shuffle the deck. And as I shuffle the cards, I'm focusing on my usual intention for these weekly general readings, and that is for the information, for the insights, for any guidance or advice to come through the cards that is going to be most helpful and beneficial as we move through the upcoming week. Alright, I'm feeling that's good. I'm going to go ahead now and cut the deck. Fan the cards out. And now I'm looking for 5 cards in the fan that are getting my attention, because I'm working with a line of 5. So those are the 5 cards I have selected. I'm taking the remainder of the deck and I'm going to move it to one side. Now I'm going to reposition the cards in a line in the order that they were selected. Alright, and so when I work with Gypsy Witch cards, I like to start with the card in the middle, much like I do when I read with Lenormand. For me, the middle card always represents the central issue, or what we're being asked to focus on for the week ahead. And taking a look at the card, we have the ship card with the 9 of hearts. Now when I work with Gypsy Witch cards, I read both the symbol and the playing card insert. Starting with the symbol. So ship is a card that can represent travel. So I find this very interesting in light of what's going on in the collective with, the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic situation, and how some of us have been experiencing a lockdown or a quarantine. And so I see this, and the first thing that I think of is that travel has been minimal, right? And so maybe as a result of that, people may have been focusing on where they would like to go and what they would like to do, because the ship for me is a card that represents travel. Now, interestingly enough, the 9 of hearts as the playing card insert is the wish card in cartomancy. So for me, this could just be about maybe for some of us, wishing that we could travel, or that there is going to be people who are embarking on journeys. And as soon as I said that, it made me think of something else, so I'll come back to that thought. But people who are embarking on journeys to maybe destinations that they have wished to go to maybe for some time. Right, so now, as I talked about embarking on journeys, I was reminded that this could also be a metaphorical journey, which means that on some level it's not literal travel, but maybe your journey through life, right? In that regard, the ship is traveling over water, and water symbolically can represent our emotional life or our spiritual life. So this could be a spiritual voyage, maybe that people are embarking on in connection or in relation to what's going on in the collective, right? for me, I can only speak for myself, but sometimes what happens is when I'm experiencing something in my physical world, a physical, concrete, tangible, real world experience, it causes me to reflect, spiritually speaking. And how does that inform my spiritual life, right? Or how does that impact or play into my spiritual journey, my spiritual voyage, those kinds of things, right? So it could be that. It could also be that we're being asked to get in touch with, going back to the Nine of Hearts, what it is that would give us a greater sense of emotional satisfaction or emotional fulfillment, playing on the idea that that's the wish card. So it could be about fulfillment in terms of wish fulfillment, right? But it could also be about emotional satisfaction because the Nine of Hearts is also about emotional gain, right? So I'm seeing that. So it could be that people are going to be focusing on what it is that they hope and wish for. We go with the Nine of Hearts, or maybe focusing on what would give them a greater sense of emotional satisfaction in life. In some regards, it may center around travel, right? Now, if I make this really literal with the ship, this could also be about things that are happening overseas. So some people may be focusing on foreign affairs. This could also be about shipping, so there may be about transporting goods. This for me could be about import-export. So this could be about transporting goods overseas, like I said, or it could be about shipping and shipments. I know that I've been waiting on, talking about Wish, I've been waiting on my second deck to arrive, the initial copy of it, my test copy. And I got an ETA, estimated time of arrival, and that has come and gone. So I was hoping and wishing it would arrive when I got the message about the ETA, but it hasn't. So for me, my focus would be on here, if I keep this relative and personal to me, the shipment of the deck. When is the shipment going to arrive? I was about to say, when is the shipment going to arrive? Oh, but as soon as I said that, it could be about somebody's metaphorical ship coming in, right? So it could be about that too. But in my particular case, I'm focused on my new deck and when it's going to arrive so I could play with it, right? So I can break it in so I could see how it works, right? So that's what I'm seeing with the ship. The ship could be either a literal journey because it represents travel or a metaphorical journey through life, one that may inform you more about what you believe to be true on a spiritual level, right? This could also be about focusing on what it is you hope and wish for, Nine of Hearts, or the things that would give you a greater sense of emotional satisfaction. So that's what I'm seeing with the middle card. So now I read with direction in mind. The ship, interesting, is facing this card. So when we get to that card, it'll be interesting to see where the voyage or where the journey is taking us, right? And if I make that go one step further with that, then this is about the ship moving away from this card towards this card, right? So let's take a look at the opening line in an effort to get to these two cards. So opening the line up, we have Tower and we have the Ten of Clubs. Okay, so the first thing I will say about the Tower can represent, isolation. It could represent being alone, being confined. Again, with what's going on in the collective, this could be about people who are quarantining themselves, people who are isolating themselves, people who are spending more time by themselves, right? And of course, that would be in connection to the coronavirus, COVID-19, the pandemic, whatever word you'd like to use for this collective experience, right? So there is that. So Tower can represent that. Tower can also represent things being official. So for me, this is a card that can talk about a company, it can talk about a corporation, it can talk about a firm, some kind of institution. It could also be talking about the government. And so this could be, local government, state government, federal government, depending on where you live. I'm seeing with this being here in the United States, for me, this could be about possibly how the local, state, and federal government are taking action regarding the COVID-19 experience, right? What are the rules? What are the regulations? What are the policies that are going to be put into place as the first card this week, possibly in relation to the coronavirus experience, right? So that's the first thing that I'm seeing. right? So it could be that. How can we maybe move away from isolation, right? With this card being about movement and travel, how can we move away from isolation? And would any kind of rule, regulation, or policy play a role or part in that? So that's what I'm seeing with that. Now, with the Ten of Clubs, the Ten of Clubs for me is a small business card, right? So it could be about what rules, regulations, or policies are businesses, especially small businesses, going to have to put into place or enact in order to reopen. We are still in the process here in the United States where some businesses are in the process of slowly reopening, right? So this could speak to that. What are the rules, the regulations for them to open back up and to serve the public? The clubs as a suit can represent all things social and things regarding the public, right? Now I'm seeing with the 10 of clubs, besides small businesses, it can also be about retail establishments. So there may be something about retail establishments in particular regarding certain rules or regulations that they have to either create, put into place. The word that was coming to me is compliance. So how do businesses comply with rules and regulations if they want to be open, right? So I'm seeing that with the Ten of Clubs. Now, the Ten of Clubs can also be a card that represents travel. So we have two travel cards this week, and I tend to see the Ten of Clubs in two ways. It can represent business travel if we go with the idea that the Ten of Clubs can also be about small business. So it may be about people who are traveling for business, and it could be in connection to the process of getting their businesses up and running again. But it can also be a journey over water, right? So we have that with the Ten of Clubs, and we have that with the ship card, right? Because ships travel over water. So again, we have something maybe in the literal sense with journeys over water, or something having to do with business being done overseas, right? So again, tower can represent, isolation. It could represent separation. It could represent a state of confinement. But it can also represent a company, corporation, firm. It may have something to do with politics or the government. And with that in mind, it may be tied to a rule, a regulation, or a policy. Right? So that's what I'm seeing with this card. So now let's take a look at the card in between the two. And here we have the tree card. Okay. So the tree card first is about health and healing for me. So again, this is all about, people who have been isolating themselves due to something having to do with health. Isolation or confinement to stay healthy, right? But at some point, how can we move beyond that? Again, that's what these three cards are saying. So there may be something about seeing some movement here. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the insert, the Three of Clubs, is a growth and development card. And so here we have the growth and development of business, right? This could also be about business partnerships. But the two cards here are both clubs, right? So clubs in and of itself can represent progress being made, right? So it's about like, how can we progress? This week is all about making some kind of progress. So for some of us, it may be in the literal work and business sense, but then maybe some of us, it may be more social. It's how do we either develop or redevelop certain friendships, certain social relationships, things of that nature. Again, the idea here with the Three of Clubs, it represents growth and development. But the tree is very symbolic here because it represents health and healing. It represents being able to branch out, right? And I'm seeing this with the tree card here. It may be going with the idea that the ship can represent something having to do with things of a foreign nature or something overseas. Somebody may feel that it's time to reconnect with their roots, tree. And I'm seeing that in particular about like an ancestry journey. And so that could be literal or metaphorical. It's making me feel like someone is wanting to reconnect with their roots. So it could be about discovering where you come from, what your ancestry is, what your lineage is. I know if I go back to what I said about a spiritual voyage, I know with what's been going on in the collective about race and race relations, that for some of us, and I'm saying some of us in terms of people of color, it may have sparked a need to take that kind of voyage, right? To reconnect with your ancestry in a more spiritual way, or a more profound spiritual experience, right? So I'm seeing that for somebody here. It's making me feel like, you know, the person is doing it so they don't feel, quote unquote, feel so isolated, so alone, that kind of thing. Maybe so disconnected because the Tower is also a card of separation. So it may be during this time of separation, it's compelling people to want to explore more of that side of their life, you know, their ancestry, who came before them. And maybe it's to kind of incorporate that history into one's spiritual practice. But for me, aside from that, I'm thinking that the focus is on health and healing, and what kind of rules, regulations, policies are going to be created or instituted or put into place in relation to that, so we can move forward, so there can be some progress made. And it may be having to do with travel overseas in relation to that. Like, this is the focus, and so there may be a rule, regulation, or policy about foreign travel. Okay, so that's what I'm seeing with the first three cards. So now let's see what's on the other side of ship going forward. And here we have lightning and the 6 of clubs. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed, going with the playing card insert first, is that we have 3 clubs cards on the table. Okay, so clubs as the ruling majority, again, can represent work and business. And so that could be, again, work and business in the literal sense, but it could also be metaphorically work that we need to put some effort into, right? Work and effort. Or it could also be business at hand, right? And with the 6 of clubs, the 6 of clubs is a card for me that can represent 2 things. It could represent speaking. So this could be speaking to the public. So this could be about sharing a message regarding what the first 3 cards have been talking about with the public. Or taking some kind of responsibility, right? The 6 of clubs is also a card that can talk about advice. And so when I read a line of cards and the 6 of clubs is closest to the end of the line, this usually represents being on the receiving end of some kind of advice. So there may be, since this mirrors tree and the 3 of clubs, this could be about receiving advice regarding health and healing. And of course, that would be, again, a reference to something having to do with the coronavirus, COVID-19, right? Those kinds of things. I'm seeing that. And it could also be the responsibility of people in business, you know, regarding the reopening of your business or businesses in general. So again, the 6 of clubs for me can represent speaking. So it could be speaking in connection to work, but I'm seeing this as public speaking. So there may be a message this week that's being given to the masses, to the public as a whole, right? And it would be in regards to the coronavirus experience, right? You know, and again, going with the idea, where do we go from here? Now, the fact that clubs also are the majority, again, there's this thing about progression, because for me, clubs as a suit can represent progress being made, and on a social or public level, right? So there's that as well with the 6 of clubs. And again, it's about receiving advice. So I'm going back to the first card. There may be some maybe new guidelines being instituted. You know, again, a rule, regulation, or policy that we're being advised to strongly take, you know, in terms of action steps, right? So now let's come to the symbol, the lightning. So the way I look at this is I look at the cloud, and so the cloud first for me, because it's gray, can represent, you know, a time of uncertainty, an atmosphere of uncertainty, an atmosphere of confusion, those kinds of things. The lightning, in regards to that, can represent something that's a bit of a shock, something that's a surprise. It's like a bolt out of the blue, meaning like something comes and we didn't see it coming. It happens unexpectedly, right? Or without warning, that kind of thing. If I take a step back and connect it to what we're experiencing with the coronavirus, COVID-19 experience, then this could just be, weathering a storm, right? Now, I talked about the idea with direction that the ship is headed towards the lightning, right? So it could just be metaphorically that we're moving into a period of uncertainty. We may be moving into a stormy time ahead, that kind of thing. So this could be the week where, if it's tied to the coronavirus, we're moving into an area of uncertainty. And that may be about, an increase in cases, confirmed cases, and what action are we going to take to bring those numbers back down, right? And I'm seeing here, if we go with the idea that the clubs started with a 10, went down to a 3, and now up to a 6, for me that looks like fluctuation, right? And then the pips here on the 6 can represent a path. I know some cartomancers refer to the 6 as a path because it looks like they're forming a road or a path or a way. So what is the path going forward? We may not be sure, and we may need to weather the storm going forward, right? And it makes me feel, I'm looking at the 6 on the card, and it makes me feel like there may be discussion, right? This is about communication and speaking, about where to assign blame. I feel like there's going to be room for pointing fingers and placing blame. And really, for me, and this is just me being on the outside looking in to some degree of the experience, when people do that, it's because they want to shift responsibility, right? So it could just be, we may see through words being spoken this week where people are not willing to assume responsibility for where we are and how we got here. So I'm seeing that. Okay, so the other thing I will say about the lightning in the positive sense, so the lightning can represent a flash of insight. So maybe if I bring this back down maybe to a more personal slant or lens, that if you've been experiencing a gray area in your life, you may have some sudden flashes of insight. With regard to the lightning, that could represent a revelation, an epiphany, an aha, but something that provides a moment of clarity, right? The other thing could be with the lightning, because the cloud represents the air, atmosphere, and I tend to think of it as the mind, it could also represent brainstorming, right? In order to move forward, right, taking action, then it may be a matter of people getting together, collectively speaking, and brainstorming how we move through this quote-unquote stormy time, how we weather this particular storm, that kind of thing. But that's what I'm seeing here with this. So it could represent, insight, sudden insight, flashes of insight, or brainstorming, okay? So now let's take a look at the final card, rounding the line out. And here we have, okay, so I'm going to start with the Ace of Spades, but just for naming the card, we have the rapiers, I call it the crossed swords, and the Ace of Spades. Starting with the Ace of Spades first. Here we have a progression to a spade. So for me, when I read playing cards, the spades can represent a block, a challenge, an obstacle, or some kind of hurdle that we have to overcome, right? So there's that. So we have the potential, aces represent potential, the potential for a block, challenge, or an obstacle. And that would make sense if we go with the idea that we have the cloud and the lightning as a symbol coming before it, right? So there is that. When I get the Ace of Spades, it usually represents coming to a decision, right? So here we are brainstorming, right? Or we're moving into a gray area or some sort of confusion, right? With this symbol and this card, that leads to a decision needing to be made, because the Ace of Spades for me can represent the mind and making a decision, right? So it could be maybe as a result of a rule, regulation, or policy that is being considered to be instituted, it comes to a decision, right? There's a decision made about that. The interesting thing about the crossed swords or the rapiers represents dueling, right? So it represents conflict, right? It represents a conflict of ideas, a conflict of opinions, that kind of thing. Is like a disagreement is what I'm seeing with this. So it may be as a result of the brainstorming here. We have brainstorming, but then we can't come to some kind of agreement, right? We can't make our minds up about it, right? there is some sort of conflict, like each side of the situation or each party on the different sides of the situation can't come to some agreement, right? Now, sometimes this card can represent some kind of threat, So I'm seeing that, and so it could just be a matter of we need to brainstorm, come to some kind of decision about the quote-unquote threat of coronavirus or COVID-19. And I'm putting that with this idea that there may be a continual uptick in confirmed cases, right? So now I will also say this. There may be, for some people, the Ace of Spades can be about transforming one's life, right? Because the Ace of Spades can represent undergoing a profound moment of change, right? For some people, this card can come up when you're being given the heads up to start rebuilding your life. And for some people, I'm going to go back to what I said about businesses in particular. It could be that with work and business, people are rebuilding their working lives, their business lives, things of that nature. And there may be some sort of conflict regarding that, because this represents a duel. So I'm thinking like, dueling interests, competing interests, things of that nature. But it makes me feel like there is something about coming to some kind of agreement, right? But it centers around some kind of major decision. So on that note, I will go ahead and end this week's Oracle Outlook reading here. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I wrap up, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have the best day possible, and I'm hoping that you have the best week possible. Take care.